Hello, and welcome to another episode of Pioneer Valley Life. I'm James Sullivan, your host. We are here, as usual, in the studios of Easthampton's E-Media, which is in the Eastworks building in Easthampton. You're welcome to come in anytime if you've got an idea for a show. Like I had an idea for this show. I came in, presented the idea, and they said, sure, we'll help you do that. And here I am, well over a year and a half doing my show. And this could be you sitting on this stage, interviewing guests, doing whatever you want, because the opportunity is here. You should really take advantage of it. Today, my guest is Mickey Rathbun, who is from Amherst. Some of you might recognize the name because she writes a gardening column for the Daily Hampshire Gazette. Also shows up in the Greenfield Recorder, I think, as well, because the publishers are the same.
Yes. But
today we're going to talk about a book that she recently wrote, which is quite a fascinating topic. The name of the book is The Real Gatsby. It's about a man named George Gordon Moore, who was Mickey's grandfather. And through research on her part and other people, she feels as though it's a great possibility that her grandfather was the inspiration for J. Gatsby in the book The Great Gatsby by Fitzgerald. And that's a pretty interesting conclusion to come to, don't you think?
Yeah, I was surprised at what I found.
Yeah.
There was this sort of rumor in the background when I was growing up that my grandfather had been a model for J. Gatsby, but I don't know, nobody in the family seemed to really pay attention to it, and so I was curious when I finally looked into it, but I didn't expect to find the amount of evidence that I did find. My grandfather was completely self-made man. He was the youngest of 10 children born to Irish potato famine immigrants.
Yeah.
And he was very bright. He self-educated. He studied law, became a lawyer, then immediately became a businessman, made a ton of money on the first electrified rail systems in Midwestern cities, mostly in Michigan. They were getting rid of horse-drawn trolleys and replacing them with, electric.
So these were basically streetcars.
Yes,
right?
streetcars,
not
exactly.
Traveling long distances.
Yeah, yes. They called it traction. Anyway, he made a lot of money in that, and then he moved his center of operations to London. And he had a very interesting time in London, ended up being very woven into World War I. He was best friends with Sir John French, who was the first commander-in-chief of the British Expeditionary Force in France. So my grandfather basically lived at General Headquarters with French and went to all the meetings, and he met the Prince of Wales, and he just got involved into every situation he was in. He had some angle to make himself useful, and that's just what he loved doing. But anyway, he eventually came back to New York, and he'd always wanted to learn to play polo. And he had connections out in California. So he went out there, and he knew how to ride because he'd grown up kind of with like draft horses.
Yeah.
But he joined this polo team, the Santa Barbara polo team, and he had tons of money, so he was very happy to buy the best polo ponies for the team, and he was just a kind of gregarious, sort of charismatic guy, and he became captain of the team, and they went east one summer to play against all the East Coast teams. And one of the East Coast teams they played against was the Meadowbrook team in Long Island. And on that team was a man named Tommy Hitchcock. And Tommy Hitchcock was a war hero. He was the young guy. He was still a student at Harvard. Excellent athlete. One of the best American polo players of all time. And he and my grandfather got to be kind of friends on the polo field, although my grandfather was kind of a brute out there, but Hitchcock kind of respected him for that. Anyway, Tommy Hitchcock was F. Scott Fitzgerald's model for Tom Buchanan, Daisy Buchanan's, polo playing husband. And when Fitzgerald moved to Long Island in 1922, I think it was, one of the first people he met was Tommy Hitchcock. And he just became obsessed with Tommy Hitchcock. I mean, it was this, Fitzgerald's typical story. Here's this, good-looking, super waspy athlete, war hero from a very prominent, wealthy family, and it was just sort of Fitzgerald kind of like, I want that to be me, I want to be that person. He just always aspired to be the rich boy, not the poor boy. Anyway, so his fixation on Hitchcock was pretty clear. Tommy Hitchcock at that point was working for my grandfather in his sort of investment operation. Tommy Hitchcock was sort of his business protege. And Tommy Hitchcock lived in my grandfather's townhouse in Manhattan. And this is all while Fitzgerald and Zelda were moving to Great Neck and meeting all of Tommy Hitchcock's friends. So the chances, given what was going on and the relatively small group of people in that world, I think that, Fitzgerald must have met my grandfather. My grandfather also gave crazy parties. All his parties have been written up in, newspaper columns, and he just was this fabulous host. Gatsby gave wild parties, but he wasn't a fabulous host, I think.
See,
He was sort of retiring and was, back talking on the phone a lot of the time with, his business connections. But my grandfather, just put on a really good spread and had interesting people. And so, I think there's pretty good evidence that Fitzgerald, knew my grandfather and was kind of impressed by his backstory. This self-made man. Nobody really knew where my grandfather had made his money because it got pretty shady sometimes. He was kind of a con man. And then in the book, as I reread the book, I just was astonished. There were so many particulars that the two men shared, Gatsby and my grandfather. They both came from sort of out west. That was an important concept for Fitzgerald, the West. Hardscrabble families. They'd both had stints in England. I can imagine that having spent the better part of 8 years in London, my grandfather had quite the British affectation and the clothes, and which obviously Gatsby had too. My grandfather also had, the love of his life was a young woman named Diana Manners, who was the most famous, sought-after debutante of her time. She came from a very, well-bred family. The Duke and Duchess of Rutland were her parents, and she was absolutely gorgeous and a sort of a flirt and a kind of loved to be exotic. And my grandfather met her and just went like, okay, she's the one for me. He was much older than she was. He gave her these crazy presents all the time, like a miniature monkey with a diamond collar around its neck, and I think it was a diamond and emerald bracelet that was supposed to have belonged to Catherine the Great. He just showered her with presents, which she thought was great. But she also was kind of like, who is this older guy, you know? And her family, of course, hated him because he had no pedigree at all, and was I mean, they just saw him as sort of a kind of a pushy American,
Yeah.
you know.
With money.
With money, yeah, but not the right kind of money, you know.
Yeah, new money.
There's good money, and then there's the new kind of
Yeah.
tarnished money. So he had that story also, my grandfather, you know, the beloved blonde that he couldn't get, you know.
So he never did.
No. I mean, they had complicated relationships, and he had a very complicated relationship with her family, which you'll have to read my book if you want to find that out, because
Okay.
it's much too long to go into. You know, I was convinced that there had been some connection there, and I've talked to, you know, quite a few Fitzgerald scholars, and I've told them, you know, what I think happened, and they're very convinced. And so that's been kind of fun. There's this Fitzgerald scholar named James West, who I talked to, and you know, he read my book, and he said, "Yeah, as good a candidate as anyone." So it's nice to be validated that way.
Yeah.
But I have to say, even though, you know, that was sort of the hook that got me into the book. I knew nothing about my grandfather's life. So just uncovering it all and sort of chasing down these threads of information, it was very interesting. And he was quite an incredible man. He ended up poor.
Right.
He died at age of 95, dressing for a party. Yeah, just massive heart attack. Bam. But yeah, I mean, he lived life the way Gatsby lived life.
I see.
I mean, just like he didn't think there was anything he couldn't do.
Right.
And he just pursued all his dreams.
Whatever it was. Yeah. So,
Yeah. I mean, he bought this huge ranch in Carmel, 33,000 acres. He built his dream polo setup. He had a huge lake built. He had invited guests. They all went, you know, boar hunting. He imported
I read a little bit about that. Yeah.
My grandfather, for better or for worse, is responsible for bringing the wild boar to the East Coast.
Yeah.
But also, when he bought his ranch in California in the mid-20s, he had some of his boar shipped across the country from North Carolina to Carmel and set them loose on his huge ranch, and they bred and bred, and now they're all over the West Coast, and everybody hates them because they dig up farm fields, and they're fierce and kind of nasty animals.
Because he had quite a hunting lodge where he offered people to come and hunt for these types of animals.
Exactly, yeah.
That included indoor plumbing, of all things.
Yes, this was in the Smoky Mountains, way out. It's still way out in the middle of nowhere. I visited there, and it is truly remote.
Yeah.
And he just said, "This is so beautiful. I'm going to build my hunting lodge here." And so he did. And he imported all these exotic animals from Europe. He brought bears from Germany. And he had gotten interested in boar hunting when he was living in England. So he tracked down, he said, you know, the fiercest boars that he could find, and worked with a dealer in Germany. Anyway, brought over these boar, and they escaped their pens and bred with all the, you know, feral wild pigs. And so that's where
and the rest is history.
Yeah.
So he was your mother's father.
He was my mother's father.
Yeah.
That's right.
And like you say, you didn't really have much to do with him personally until much later in life, because in the picture that shows you and your siblings, you're quite young.
Yeah.
You're sitting in his lap. He's quite old at that time.
Yeah.
So most of the information that you've had to gather, there was really no oral history that you could just tap into immediately.
No.
You had to go, well, what about this? So that must have been quite the process of just learning how to research and how to follow stories and see where it led, and maybe it didn't lead anywhere, but
Yeah.
and then have to figure out, that sounds good, I'll use that in the book.
Well, one thing that helped a lot was that he was written about in a lot of other people's
Really?
books.
Uh-huh.
In a lot of the histories of the World War I and memoirs and biographies of World War I people, he often shows up because he was a very conspicuous figure. Very few people could get to General Headquarters. Very few people had access to John French. And my grandfather was just, holed up in, his house at General Headquarters. So, a lot of people sort of resented his proximity.
Right.
And of course, there was some of the kind of, scandal sheets, suggested that the two of them were gay, and there were these sort of cartoons of the, two men. But, I think they were just very good friends.
Yeah.
And French did not have a lot of money. He was a womanizer without a lot of money. And my grandfather was a womanizer who did have money. So my grandfather rented a big house in London and invited French to move in with him. And he said, that sounds great, So wild parties, a lot of sort of upper crust Londoners sort of saying, oh, scandalous,
Right.
but they all went to the parties and
Yeah.
had a good time.
Couldn't bear not to be on the guest list.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't know a lot about my grandfather because my mother, there were two children. My grandfather married my grandmother. It was her second marriage, his second marriage also. And she was a kind of difficult, flighty, alcoholic, difficult wife. I think they both cheated on each other. She eventually ran off with one of his polo teammates. But my mother's upbringing was not great. She didn't really have parents, I mean, her mother was sort of off always, finding the new man. She just was, revolving door of husbands. And her father kind of was not on the scene a lot. And so my mother sort of grew up with this sort of uneasy lack of support, and just in the Depression, my grandfather had lost all his money, and so he really had no money. I mean, he had the ranch, but he couldn't pay anybody to do anything, and that was painful for my mother, it was just so, she just never really wanted to talk about him. She had her own problems with mental health issues, and she was a terrible, terrible drinker. And just sometimes something would just set her off and she would just go into these rages. And the subject of sort of her upbringing and what her parents were like, and you just didn't want to go there. It was just, I think I said in the book, it's like caution tape, and just, she was such a volatile person that nobody wanted to rock the boat with her. She was a wonderful person also, but that side of things kind of kept.
Had anybody else approached her or you or anybody about the same story that you wrote about, thinking, was he the, was somebody came across the same thing and said, what about this guy? Who, was he, was he the inspiration for Gatsby and whatever? It seems as though somebody might have thought about that at some point and asked somebody, and maybe it just got shut down immediately and said, no way.
I mean, not to my knowledge.
Yeah.
I mentioned it to, my mother has a sort of step cousin, a woman named Honoria Donnelly, who was very close friends with my mother. She had grown up with the Fitzgeralds. Her parents, Honoria's parents, were Sarah and Gerald Murphy, who were the subject of a book called Living Well is the Best Revenge. Anyway, they were this sort of it couple in the 20s and, had a house in the south of France. And anyway, they were very close with the Fitzgeralds. And I asked Honoria, I said, do you know anything about this? This happened to be on my wedding night, oddly enough. And Honoria said, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
So that, there were several kind of sparks that sort of kept me going.
Yeah.
I mean, I was busy writing a lot of other stuff, but, in kind of spare moments, I'd, read another World War I book. And
so it's, you were tracking down a mystery, so to speak.
Yeah, it was, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I don't think anyone will ever know.
Right, no. But I mean, it's, the glamorization of that era of the stories that we read in high school or whatever, most of which I've forgotten. It certainly was the subject of questionable behavior on parts of people with money.
Yeah.
Because that was all that set them apart, in a sense, was the money.
Yeah.
When you had the Harrimans and the Rockefellers and this and that and that and that, the fortunes that they made at that time, which may be similar to what's going on these days, but they made great fortunes, on the backs of the laborers.
Yeah.
Which has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
And, I was born in Goshen, New York, which is where the Harrimans were quite big in that. Goshen is next to the town of Harriman.
Oh, okay.
And the Harriman family had a big estate up on top of one of the mountains.
Right.
And one of the Averill's brother, he supported the horse, what is it now? The sulky racing horsing.
Right. The trotting horses.
Yeah, the Hall of Fame of the Trotter is in Goshen. And
interesting.
so that was supported by Averill's brother. And so they had a big role play in that area for quite a while. Not anymore, but in those days, yeah.
That's interesting. My grandfather had trotting horses. And again, this is back in his early years when he still lived in Michigan. And he bought a farm and he scoured the country for the best stallions and brood mares and raised very successful stable. Eventually he kind of lost interest and he was just too busy with too many other things.
Right.
And he sold off his stable. But, he had horses who won sort of the equivalent of the Kentucky Derby.
Which was the Hamiltonian.
Well, it wasn't the Hamiltonian. I don't think he won that one. But there were other races for promising 3-year-olds and and he was written about all the time, and the Detroit Free Press loved him, because he was sort of a fun horse owner, and and
but
just
eventually
loved him.
everything kind of coalesced on Long Island.
Yeah, and then Tommy Hitchcock was his business protege, and that worked out very well for Hitchcock because Hitchcock needed to learn the ropes. I mean, what they did basically, they were capitalists, which meant that they collected capital for mining ventures. They were into coal mining, some projects in South America, timber, minerals. So Tommy Hitchcock had all the connections and, people with a lot of money who might be interested in investing in these business
Right.
concerns. And my grandfather sort of had the how-to, know-how to set them up. But there was, I don't know how much of a crook my grandfather was. I mean, he was definitely somewhat of a crook. But the scale, I don't know. I didn't really, I could have sort of tracked down all the lawsuits and all that stuff. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I know how to read that stuff. But I didn't, it wasn't my focus. I mean, I knew enough, let's put it that way, to know that there were some sham businesses that he'd set up and took people's money.
Yeah, if somebody who was writing the story was not a family member, they might have wanted to go to there just to say, "Oh, look what I found."
Yeah.
Whereas, you were kind of protecting things in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I was protecting, but honestly, that kind of, chicanery just, it was pretty common.
Right.
There were very few laws about, what you could do and what you had to tell your shareholders.
Right.
Very little, So I think he was just, and he was a lawyer too. I mean, so he kind of knew what he could get away with.
Right.
But at a certain point, so he lost all his money when the Depression came. I mean, his money was sort of a house of cards anyway. So it just fell to pieces. But he always wanted to regain his fortune. He ended up moving to LA and living there quite modestly. But he had a couple of companies that he ran that were still, trying to find good mining opportunities for things like molybdenum and bauxite, or just things that it's not gold and silver.
Right.
And they were always kind of cockamamie. And my father was a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and my grandfather would send my father, like, sort of draft contracts, explaining what these companies were, and trying to get my father to be, like, on the board of directors. And my father would just say, "Hell no! Like, I'm head of the D.C. Bar Association. You think I'm going to put my name on, something that's just, fraudulent?" And my grandfather's response was, like, "Who's going to put an 86-year-old man in jail?" I mean, he actually did get put in jail once.
Really?
Yeah. But that was for not paying his payroll. Yeah. Which is kind of a not so nice thing to do.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, stiffing your employees is pretty low.
Yeah. Because something about he owed back wages to the manager there at the lodge.
Yeah.
And so he eventually paid him, and then he gave him the lodge. But, he couldn't maintain it. But
yeah. I mean, I think it's not uncommon among very rich people that they don't pay their bills.
Right.
It's just like, what's going to happen?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm still a wonderful rich person, and everybody admires me, but...
You didn't have anybody in mind there, did you?
Oh, yeah. Can't think who that might be. But in terms of his, like, whether or not he was a malevolent person or not, the big shock to me came when, so my mother's story about how my grandfather lost the ranch was that, he'd mortgaged it, he couldn't afford to pay, and his ex-wife, my grandmother, she was from a wealthy Massachusetts family. She offered him the money. She'd lend him the money or give him the money to pay off the mortgage. But he was too proud to accept a handout from her.
Huh.
I mean, I think he probably still harbored bad feelings about her because she ran off with Aidan Rourke, this gorgeous Irish polo player. But anyway, too proud to accept the money. let it go.
Yeah.
Got sold at auction, and
Yeah.
very traumatic for my mother and everybody involved. And that was the story.
Yeah.
My mother had a younger brother, her only sibling. I visited him a couple of years before he died, and he said, well, you know how he called him Daddy. I just thought that was so funny. I just couldn't imagine anyone calling
Right.
George Moore Daddy. But anyway, you know how Daddy lost the ranch? I said, well, yeah. My mother said, well, he just shook his head and he said, you know, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
What really happened was that he went to her and she said, I'll pay off the mortgage. I'll give you the money. It's like $60,000 or something to pay the mortgage, but you have to put the property in both our names. So,
Yeah.
according to my Uncle David, he took the $60,000, did not put the property
Yeah.
in both their names, and he ran off to LA.
Yeah.
So that just sticks with me.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
it was my Uncle David, who never liked his father.
I see, yeah, yeah,
it was sort of
yeah.
like my mother was the father's favorite, David was the mother's favorite,
Yeah,
you know, so
yeah.
there was always that
Yeah.
dynamic.
Right. Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But
in
it's
my
yeah.
mind, that's like the worst thing that he could have done.
Right, right.
You know.
So it's fascinating in that you've created a book that combines fiction with fact.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and a lot of us are more familiar with the fiction part. And, you know, we all read about those, you know, Roaring Twenties and stuff like that. Seemed to be pretty great, you know, too. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But, you know, to know that your grandfather was uniquely positioned in all of that, in truth, not fiction, in truth,
Yeah.
it makes for a fascinating story.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people read the book and they say, Mickey, when's the movie coming out? And I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
Right,
Might be
right.
a good movie.
it might be, yeah, yeah. You can just see some of today's actors in there,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
It would be interesting, yeah. Well, thanks very much today for being my guest here on Pioneer Valley Life. That's what we talk about here. We didn't talk anything about gardening,
No.
and we didn't talk about horse riding.
No.
No, but you know, those things are things people could go to your website, find out a lot more, find out how to buy the book if they want to buy the book and read more. You can actually read the prologue and the first chapter on your website,
Right.
and you get some nice insight. There's a nice picture there with, as I mentioned, Averell Harriman and Hitchcock and your grandfather and one other person. I
Oh,
think.
that was Aidan Rourke,
Oh, was
the
it? Oh,
Irish
yeah. Oh,
polo
yeah.
ace
Yeah,
who ran
yeah.
off with my
Yeah,
grandmother.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because polo's still big in certain parts of the world.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and you know, so that tie in as well, and especially on the cover of the book, there he is sitting on a polo pony. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, great. This has been fascinating, and
Well, thank
I
you so
hope
much for-
everybody enjoyed it. And who knows what you'll write about next?
Yeah. Who knows?
Okay. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you so much for
Sure.
having me. This
Sure.
was really a pleasure.
Great. Thank you.